She got away, she got away, she got away, she got away, oh, she got away, oh, she got away.
Welcome to She Got Away, the show where I, Kibbi, share my journey of survival and healing from the depths of satanic ritual abuse, or SRA. SRA is an extreme form of abuse, often silenced, where criminal activities intersect with unspeakable acts of sexual abuse. On today's episode, I'll be doing my very first interview with Katherine, the host of the Imagination Podcast, a popular podcast that gives survivors a safe place and platform to speak on. Why is Emma so passionate about SRA or ritual abuse? What's Emma's experience with meeting so many survivors? This podcast is for anyone with an open mind who doesn't get triggered by evil. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Let's go spread some light. Hi, friends. Welcome to episode 5 of She Got Away. I'm your host, Kibbi. Today's episode is with a guest. We are going to talk to Katherine, the host of the Imagination Podcast. Emma is a cannabis enthusiast, a child trafficking advocate, satanic ritual abuse advocate. Basically, she has our backs for anyone who's experienced childhood trauma and has a podcast that interviews satanic ritual abuse or ritual abuse survivors. And I'm so excited to talk to her because I have questions. So welcome, Emma.
Kibbi, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, and it's really cool to see survivors coming out and not only talking about their story, but then creating platforms to either bring people on or to share to a wider audience. So this is amazing what you've created. It's so valuable, and it's an absolute honor to come on and be with you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here and a part of the community, as well as the audience who believes that this stuff happens. Us survivors need you. And I personally am so warmed by the amount of people that have survivors' backs. Before speaking out about it, I had no idea. And more people are coming that are doing things like you, or even just believing survivors, which is a dream come true for me. So thank you for your work.
Absolutely. I mean, that's an honor too. It's really cool to be able to stand next to all of you warriors and to have a part in this, And it almost feels weird to me sometimes to be thanked for it because, like, in honesty, I'm just doing what everybody should be doing. Like, I look at the rest of society and like want to shake everybody. I'm like, why aren't you standing next to me? Like, why don't you guys like why don't I have the whole world like next to me screaming at the top of their lungs about this, And not just me, but others like me who are stepping in to help. It's really sad and scary that, society still kind of looks at this or doesn't, but regardless, they're not stepping in with us. They're in the ones that know it's happening. It's even worse because it's like, well, if you're not coming up and standing with us, like, are you with us? Do you stand with children or are you looking away and you're complicit? I think a lot of people are going to struggle to contend with that one day when this stuff does come out and they're going to have to face that they didn't join us, and didn't believe you guys. So it's really important work that you're doing. And it's a lot of courage to talk about this stuff. So thank you, Kibbi, for being a light in this community also.
Yeah, thank you. And on the contrary, I do want to point out the positive and the amount of people that do believe.
Yes.
I am so overwhelmed when I started sharing my story. I thought maybe 10% of people would be there to support me, but it's actually more like 90. But that 10%, I mean, we have so many people in this world, in my opinion, too many to stop this issue or even begin to stop this issue. I think awareness is key. And yeah, so hopefully more will go from denial to truth on this topic. I do have some questions for you. I'm curious, why so passionate, right? Like I'm very warmed by anyone who hasn't experienced this and is so passionate about it. What brought you to being passionate about satanic ritual abuse survivors and advocating for them?
I didn't know about any of this growing up. I wasn't taught about this. I was fed the same kind of stranger danger line that a lot of kids are. And I believed that the world was relatively safe and that the times that bad things did happen, we saw them on the news. And, when you watch the news, obviously, like it's all sort of negative. But let's just say you're watching 1 hour, it's like, oh, well, all the crimes taken care of, that's really horrible that these things happen. But obviously, there's people out there taking care of it. People are getting arrested. And, I can sleep good at night knowing that our world is safe because that's what the TV's showing me. So I grew up with that narrative. And around 2019, 2020, when the world sort of shut down, I'm going to be careful with my words here just because I know this is on YouTube. When the world shut down, I work in the cannabis industry, like you said, and I'm in sales, and my whole career depended on driving, and I was always out and about. I was working really long days. And then all of a sudden, the world shut down. I didn't have to drive everywhere. I got my work done a lot quicker because I was at home. And I started sort of, browsing the internet more. I had more time on my hands to, I guess, see what was going on in the world. And I started coming across these terms like human trafficking. And I kept seeing them, whether it was about the border or about, a trafficking ring somewhere. I just became more aware of it. And I was shocked because it went against the narrative that I grew up with. And I'm thinking like, wait, there's like rings out there of people. They're not just, one predator out there going out and hurting somebody randomly, and it's orchestrated. Like people plan this and it's like a cartel. And it got my brain spinning because it challenged me so much. And I started digging into human trafficking. And eventually the rabbit hole led me to more sinister terms such as satanic ritual abuse, trauma-based mind control, MK Ultra, behavior modification programs, so on and so forth. And human trafficking shook my world, and learning about satanic ritual abuse broke it. It broke my whole reality. I became sort of like more recluse version of myself and needed to know all of it because I believed it the second that I heard it, but it was so devastating and it went beyond anything that I could comprehend to read about it. It changed my life the second that I learned it. It absolutely changed my life. It changed me like in my core.
Mhm.
And so I got really passionate about learning about it because everything I'm reading is saying this stuff is happening to little kids. It's bad enough if it would happen to an adult, and I understand it does. But these crimes are based around modifying the behavior of children through torture and through really heinous crimes that they perpetuate on these kids. And it's a generational pattern, is what you talk about in your content. And again, like learning all of this, it just was so horrifying to me and so horrible. And I couldn't get enough of learning about it. The problem was I would go online and the people that I would see talking about it were nonprofit owners. They're really like, political figures, and not necessarily satanic ritual abuse. That term doesn't come in, but let's just say human trafficking. I couldn't understand why there's not more survivors in the spotlight talking about this. Why are people talking about it on the news, but there's no survivors? And so I started looking for survivor testimonies because I thought, gosh, if I were to start a business, I would go find somebody that started a business and did it well and learn from them. So if I want to learn about human trafficking, I'm not going to go to a politician. I'm going to look for somebody who experienced what I want to learn. So if I want to learn about human trafficking, I'm going to go learn from somebody that was trafficked. I want to hear from them how this is and learn about it and how this happens. So I was in complete disbelief that at the time I'm searching through podcasts and I'm looking online, I'm going through YouTube, and I cannot for the life of me find a platform that is platforming survivors. And in hindsight now, there's a lot of people that I met along my journey. Like there's a lot of people that are doing it. But initially, back in 2020, I couldn't find a podcast. I couldn't find a stable outlet to learn from the people who went through this. And so I got kind of frustrated because again, all I'm seeing are these, charities and these nonprofit workers and political figures talking on behalf of survivors. But I could not find somewhere that had a collection or sort of a library of resources where I could learn about this in one place. And I had always been really passionate about podcasting because it was a way when I was driving a lot in my sales job, I would always have a podcast on, and it was a free way for me to learn. And years ago, I thought, gosh, it'd be cool one day if I could start a podcast and give back what podcasts have done to me, do something really impactful that I could impact people the same way that podcasting has impacted me. But I never had a vision for it. I always kind of kept on the back burner. Well, one day while I was really frustrated that I couldn't find survivors to listen to, I got smacked on the head with just this sort of voice in my head, I guess. I call it a God moment. Like it really felt like I had, just this direction from God right away. And it just aligned with my soul. And it was like, hey, I know you want a podcast featuring survivors or a resource. Why don't you create it? And I was like, oh, like I guess I could. The world shut down. I have a little bit more time on my hands. If the world does open up, if I had a podcast, I could center it around my job. I wouldn't have to do it for like a specific time. I could do it at night or in the morning or on weekends. And so it grew to be this purpose that I had, and it developed as a passion through the fact that I cared about it. I didn't see a lot of people doing anything about it, but I knew that I had to. I knew that I couldn't sit back. One of the first testimonies that I found was Kathy O'Brien. She's been whistleblowing for decades. If your audience knows who she is, or if they don't, she's a hero. She's amazing. She's been going at this for so long. And I look at these past generations and bless them. I know it's a different time now. We have the internet and more ways to share. But I'm thinking, so she's been around for decades and nobody stopped this yet. Nobody stepped in. Like my grandparents' generation and my parents' generation, people in those generations knew that this was happening and nobody stepped up to do anything about it. I can't do that. I won't be one of those people. Like I can't live with myself, even if I'm the only one that stands up. Like I can't allow my own conscience to perpetuate this in another generation and to know that like I did the same thing that they did. So it kind of developed as a passion out of frustration in a sense, and led to this purpose that I felt like I was divinely given, that if I'm frustrated about something, I created the solution to my own problem. And it's been amazing. Like I get to live my passion by asking the questions to the survivors. I get to create a library where they can all come together, and it's a resource for people like me, and it's changed my life learning from survivors. And it's definitely become just the thing that means the most to me that I do in my life. It's the biggest honor that I've ever had to do this. And so, I ask people on the other side of the screen, we should all be passionate about this. This should be everybody's biggest passion. Like, what is more important than the children?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. That's beautiful. I relate to that passion. I tried living in 2023 without speaking out. Here I am in 2024. It didn't work out for me. So I related to you as I heard you share that. And we thank you for your passion. And when I first met you and saw you in your podcast, which admittedly I haven't seen any episodes, I'm actually not in a point in my recovery where I can easily see another person's testimony yet. But what I did see was you and what you were doing. And I see that you're so brave by doing this. And I wonder if you experience any backlash from it.
Great question. And I think this is a big reason why a lot of people, whether you're a survivor or not, don't speak up on this, because there is that risk that you're going to get backlash. I do get backlash. I get and have gotten so much backlash. I am going to preface this by agreeing with what you said in the beginning, that for the most part, like 90% of people have been just amazing unexpectedly. I wasn't expecting that. I expected it to be 90% of people would be bullying, So I don't want to put emphasis that this is like a huge thing, because it's not, but it is something. When you step into this, you're going against a lot of darkness, whether in the physical realm or the spiritual. There's a lot of, this has been going on since biblical times, if you want to look at it that way. This is a very ancient evil that has existed in the world. And all of a sudden, here we are in 2024, and there's an army of us like rising up to go against it. It's a lot of years of darkness that, we're shining our fresh lights on, so of course there's going to be people that are upset about it, these trafficking rings, if you want to look at it that way, these generational trafficking families, these generational satanic ritual abuse bloodline families, a lot of them date back, hundreds if not thousands of years, and they want to maintain that. They don't want that disrupted. So besides getting the trolls from people who are family members or friends of guests on my show, one really disturbing thing that I found, and it's not necessarily surprising, but I guess for this movement, it's very sensitive. It really hurts me. There are people that have been sort of placed in these roles to represent the survivor community. And I'm not saying any of these people are bad. I'm not going to express my opinions necessarily on people, but I am going to say there are people like Tim Ballard, Donald Trump. There's certain figures that are given a stage to talk on behalf of these topics. And while that's awesome because it brings awareness to it, it also prevents people, society, from finding survivors in channels like yours, Kibbi, and other survivors who are speaking out, the Kathy O'Briens, because we're looking at the people that are the most politicized or most popular, and for reasons of, again, exposure and not wanting the truth to be out there about the depth of this. Why is there no survivors? That's a question we should be all asking. Like, why is it Tim Ballard that's talking? Why isn't it you, Kibbi, that is given that platform to represent everybody? Why are survivors' YouTube channels getting taken down? So essentially, I speak out boldly about that because I truly believe, and I believed from the moment that I found Kathy O'Brien's testimony and when I was discovering other testimonies, there's no better place and nowhere we should be going except listening to survivors for information on these topics. And that's what my whole podcast is. Like, I don't have the Tim Ballards and the political figures on my podcast. I have survivors, experiencers, whistleblowers. I have the people who have gone through it personally, a firsthand testimony. And I believe that that is the most important way to learn about this. And so that's my whole point of being online, is to advocate that people talk to survivors and listen to them instead of these other people talking on behalf of them. And so the people that are put into these positions have sort of kind of minions, I guess, below them that kind of troll the internet and try to silence people, taking attention away from these talking heads. And so I get a lot of backlash from these different communities that insist that I need to listen to Donald Trump, insist that Tim Ballard is the hero coming to save us, when I'm trying to say, no, the heroes are survivors. They are the warriors. They're the ones that we've been waiting for. Like, they're the ones that can educate us on what this darkness is, and they can teach us about the trauma and how to heal it so we can ascend into the light, in a sense. We can shine a light on this darkness by learning about all of this through survivors on both ends of the spectrum, from what they go through, from the trauma end to the healing end. And all of that applies to all of society. It's not just satanic ritual abuse survivors that need to be listening to survivors. Like, we all were miseducated on how trauma affects our body. We all need to learn how to heal our inner child. We were all traumatized, whether it was by the news or dysfunction in our family. All of us have trauma that it's just stuck and dormant because we're not learning about it, and we're not taught it in school. It's not taught. Dissociative identity disorder, dissociation, extreme trauma is not taught in psychology or counseling or therapeutics. It's just not. It's left out. And so we have a society that is not trauma informed, and so we lack the tools to heal as a society. And that's what I try to bring attention to. And so I have people that advocate for false memories, from the False Memory Syndrome Foundation that come after me. The Satanic Temple hates me. And I get people on the political end and the nonprofit end that are not happy that I'm not supporting the talking heads, in a sense.
Wow, what backlash. I agree, and my experience is a little different. I run from politics, so I don't know who Tim Ballard is, but I get the people who go to Google and Google satanic ritual abuse. The first thing that pops up is Wikipedia. What does Wikipedia say? It says it's a conspiracy theory. The therapists implant the memories. I'm sorry, I know a lot of therapists. I don't know of any that are that evil or that intelligent. They say DID causes the memories, that's us creating a false truth is not a symptom of DID. They say they blame it on anti-government conspiracy theorists, really easy thing to blame, right? And false memory syndrome. False memory syndrome doesn't come with emotions, as far as I know, right? So, I mean, excuse me, but what's all this art? Like the false memory syndrome, yeah. And I'm not too educated on that, but I've gone to get clinical advice about that to understand it more. And without emotion, it's perhaps a false memory, but with such emotion attached, how can it be, right? That's how I feel. And with that group of people that like to dismiss whatever that group may come from, Tim Ballard or the politicians or Google, there's a bit of misinformation being spread, as you were saying.
Exactly. And I always combat that argument. First of all, like you said, like therapists aren't even they're not even taught about dissociative identity disorder. Do
Mhm.
you think that they're taught how to implant a false memory? Like if that were the case,
That's as evil as my mom. Like that's getting pretty evil, right? Like I can't
yes.
imagine a therapist doing that.
And if that was possible, do you really think that that information would be disseminated publicly? Like the CIA would run with it and use it behind the scenes. Like that would be a big thing for them. They wouldn't want us to know how to do that to each other. That's like a technology that they would use, you know?
Mhm.
So, but then there's also the aspect of, you know, for example, say a survivor comes forth and, you know, in their trauma or even in their healing, they're saying, gosh, I went through this experience where I'm just going to make up an example. I saw an alien and I can't explain it. And people will say, no, you didn't. How do you know that that's a false memory? I always say there's no such thing as a false memory. The problem is that we try to understand trauma and what a survivor went through a logical brain, and through our left brain of, you know, how we learn in school, something logical, something scientific, that 2 + 2 = 4. And when you're listening to a survivor speak, their memories are coming from a place of repressed memories of childhood. They're reliving a moment of their youth. It's not a moment that you're reliving as an adult. So the survivor's taking in a moment and saying, oh my gosh, I just had this memory of an alien. Okay, it's not false, first of all. The question that we should be asking with our creative right brain is what ended up happening for an alien to be there? Let's break down all the scenarios. Was it A, that the child had a Freemason grandfather who was doing a ritual on them, drugged them, and dressed up as an alien? And the child, in their fear and under drugs, literally the memory stored that it saw an alien. Did they actually see a real alien? There are people who say that aliens exist. Maybe it was a real alien. Or could it have been a virtual reality simulation of a child on drugs? And the simulation looked so real that the child's body responded as if it was happening, still had the trauma, their brain still split. And it literally was a memory that they stored that still traumatized them. All of those things happened, whether or not
Mhm.
um, it's all true. Like you can't negate that it's true. That's not it. It's just, again, we have to use our imagination with this and think, okay, she was 4. Let me go back to my 4-year-old brain and think, how could a child think that they saw an alien? You have to create scenarios of how a child could get there. And we don't do that as adults. We try to look at everything very, very logically and with this conclusive answer that needs proof. And the proof is the memory.
Mhm.
Like you said, there is, you know, it's not a false memory. It is a contextual issue where we need to figure out the context of how that memory came up, not dismiss it, you
Mhm.
know? And so that's always what I say when people are contending the false memories. And I mean, come on, like we know dissociative identity disorder exists. Like this is 100% real. And I even posted this study done today. I can't recite it verbatim, but there was a collective of a lot of survivors that came forth, and there was like 94% of them testified that repressed memories exist. And these people involving or doing the study, they didn't look at science. They made the conclusive evidence off of survivor testimonies of people who don't know each other and found that 94% of the survivors say that repressed memories actually do exist. And so, I mean, I think it's kind of weird that people from all over the world are saying the same thing, have the same experiences, and don't know each other. Like, that's
Mhm.
one hell of a conspiracy, if you ask me. Or Could it be that the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was founded by pedophiles who have CIA associations and or worked for the CIA, who had children and victims that came forward to whistleblow and were gaslit by the people that started the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, who were actually pedophiles covering up for the crimes and saying, no, you have a false memory, right? And so that's what the False
Right.
Memory Foundation is. It is a CIA PSYOP intelligence operation that was run by pedophiles covering up the tracks of their crimes by gaslighting victims, essentially, with the term that they created, a false memory. So there's no such thing as a false memory, you guys.
Well, thank you for explaining that to us. I knew it. I knew it myself. I obviously my art. What is my art? Fake emotions, you know. Um,
Exactly.
but thank you for explaining that to us. It's something I've heard. And like you said, I think it's always best to go to the survivor to find out information. For example, I didn't know this growing up. I thought my family was the only one who did this psycho behavior. But in recovery and as I share my story, I'm realizing how big this is. For example, the Monarch programming. I don't believe that was my experience. Now, I'm not going to Google to learn about it. Or even DuckDuckGo. I'm going to find other survivors who have experienced it and are sharing about it to learn about it. And that's what I think we should do. That's what I think is the most logical thing to do in this situation. There are children's lives at stake.
And that is it, the human cost. Like that should be our priority, is prioritizing that there are children's lives today that are at risk. There's children dying, there's children enslaved because we are ignoring this, as a society, and it needs to be at the forefront of our attention.
Agreed. So, Emma, probably the first thing I noticed when I discovered you, so many people were tagging your name, your podcast when I started sharing. And one of the first things I noticed when I looked at your content was unity. I felt a sense of unity around survivors. And do you do that purposely? Do you try to create unity? Because I feel so much and it's so warming.
That was, I don't want to say an unexpected side effect. My goal when I started this podcast was to have some sort of a community. I just didn't know how that would manifest itself, if it would be just with survivors, if it would be me getting advocates together. And what actually ended up happening was a fusion of the two. We have advocates and people who stand by survivors that are rising up to be a survivor's army. And we have survivors that feel more comfortable now coming forward because they see that there's people supporting them. And so we sort of have this army forming. I always say there's Satan's army that we're going up against, and we're building God's army. God woke up some of us and gave memories back to certain survivors at this time for a reason. And there's a reason we're finding each other. And of course, technology and being in this generation has something to do with that. There's more ways to reach each other. But for me, one of the biggest things that I do in my podcast is I do not allow any bullying. I delete comments and block people who try to say negative things about me or my guests. I have a zero tolerance policy for it because, in my opinion, if we're going to stop generational trauma, that's not just satanic ritual abuse. We can all take initiative in our own lives and say no to the bullies that we see every day and stand up for people that are, whether they're vulnerable, like a survivor and risking their life, and, don't have witness protection over them. These people they're very vulnerable when they come out. You've spoken about how, your family has seen your content and sort of some of the backlash that you get. That is very real. We expect survivors to come forth and we say, tell us names and, tell us locations, spill it all. And when they do, it just goes out into the void. Nothing happens because authority is involved in the cover up. And all of a sudden they're attacked and their life is at risk. Their families are at risk, their home, their whole livelihood. And so we're not protecting these people that we're asking to come forward. And so one of my biggest things and a big side effect just of saying, all right, you guys, everybody in this community, if you see a comment of somebody bullying, you better stand up for the person that they're bullying. Email me and tell me where the comment is if I missed it so I can take it off. I have amazing moderators in my chats. I do live podcast premieres 2 to 3 times a week at 6 p.m. Central Time on my channel. And I have anointed a couple amazing people as my moderators who will delete people right out of the chat that come in and are bullies. And so people have been taking pride in protecting that. So now my whole community, as soon as there's a bully, they all come together and stand up for the survivor, and they stand up to the bully. And then I go in and delete them. And so we're all kind of making a stand together. And so what's happening is survivors, they may not have potentially like direct protection from authority, but I am encouraging people, and now people are encouraging each other that recognize this and saying, we need to be the survivors. We need to be the authority that steps up and has their back. We need to go follow them on social media, share their content. We need to encourage them when they're down. We need to believe them and believe in them when they speak up, and they need to know that like we're here for them. And so it's been this really welcoming and really beautiful, organic, and intentional side effect of just literally putting my foot down and establishing boundaries in what I call core values on my podcast. I have a video of like these 5 core values that I made. And my first one was that my podcast number 1 priority is that it's a safe space. That means safe people have to be on the forefront of it. That means if there's anything unsafe, it needs to go, and we need to stand up to it. And so safety and teaching people what that is and teaching people how to be safe for a survivor has been just this amazing outlet of compassion and empathy, where now people ask themselves, like, am I being safe enough? Like, I need to, if I'm going to be in these spaces, I need to be a certain way. Like, I need to be positive and believe them, and I need to open up my arms to them and encourage them, and then in turn, like, we're rising up and becoming that community that survivors need, and I'm trying to get society to do that too. Like, I have the largest database of survivor testimonies that include names, locations, evidence, testimony in the entire world. And not one journalist or big podcaster, not one single influencer has reached out to me and been like, hey, how can I help you? I mean, that's a problem. And so I try to bring attention to that like, hey, if they're not going to pay attention to me, then we need to be loud enough to where we demand their attention. We need to come together and help each other. If Kibby's putting out videos on her YouTube, you guys need to all go share them. You guys need to blast the heck out of it and stand up for her, especially if she has family coming after her, and say, we see you guys, we're standing by her. We need to be that change. And so that is something that I really stand by. And then it helps my message of encouraging survivors that are ready to speak out to have the courage to, because they're not alone. They know that they have people behind them. They know that if they're on Twitter, that they're going to get followers and support and eyes on them. And that if any bullies come up, that they're going to be taken care of. That's how we get more people to have the courage to come forward. Like, survivors are usually met with ridicule. They're thrown in mental institutions. They're not believed. They can't even go to a church and be safe. Divorces happen, children stop talking to the parent. I mean, that's not all the time. Sometimes there's really beautiful things that happen with resources and people in a survivor's life, but it's not often. A lot of things fall apart when a survivor decides to tell somebody for the first time or to share it with everybody. And they go out and they don't have protection. Nobody listens. They're called crazy and they're gaslit. And we can't stand for that. Like, we can't be another generation that allows that. We have to be the ones that stand up to this and demand that journalists look at this and demand that politicians pay attention to it, because they're not going to unless we rise up and we're louder than them. And we have that power, you guys. There's so many more of us than them. And I really believe that if we come together and we make survivors feel safe, that more of them will start disclosing that this won't be the quote unquote conspiracy theory thing anymore, where it's once in a while you hear somebody come forward. Like, droves of survivors will have the courage to come forward if they know that we're going to believe them and that they're met with compassion and love and that we have their back and we're going to stand by them, and then as a community, like, that's something easy that everybody can do. I get people that ask me all the time, well, what can I do to help? Do that. Just go subscribe to their YouTube channel and share it with people. Go buy their book and give it to a friend. Go support their business. Like, go to them in the same way that you go donate money to a nonprofit or to a politician's campaign, whatever it is, your Starbucks. Go give that $5 to a survivor, or go for free, subscribe to their YouTube channel. Like, there's plenty of stuff that we can do, and it doesn't require time and energy. So that's been my biggest message. Like, I'm nobody special, you guys. Like, I'm not a trained public speaker. I had no experience doing podcast before this. I was just somebody who cared. I'm an everyday person. Like, that's everybody. Anybody could do what I did if I did it, like I didn't know how to do any of this. I still feel really green to it, but that's like what my message is like we can all do something. It doesn't have to be devoting hours of their life to a podcast. You can simply go stand by survivors. You can simply go support them and let them know that they're heard and believed, let them know that they're safe, and encourage each other to put an end to any type of bullying that you see and to stand up, whether it's the top end people that are ignoring this, the journalists and the politicians and whoever else, or the people that you see online bullying survivors in the comments. Like, we can all take charge and do something. And so the community aspect is just so beautiful, and I see that on in your community too. Like, you've developed a community that is very similar to that, where they understand and value that, and imagine if we all did that. Imagine if cities of people stood together and demanded that the 5 politicians that run their town do investigations. Like, they would be forced to, they'd be pressured to, and so the community is really important, because if not us, then who?
Right. Beautiful. Thank you for building us survivors such a strong community. We need this. We need you. We need the unity, the community, anyone from someone who got spanked to an SRA victim or worse. Like, we need the validation, because I feel like in society there's so much victim blaming and shaming. Then we bring up this topic and it's just goes to 200%. Your community is beautiful, and like you said, my community is beautiful too. Thank you, everybody who's here listening. I freaking love you guys. Like, I had no idea there'd be so much love when sharing my story. I thought I would just do it to heal. I didn't know I would meet so many beautiful, beautiful souls. um and these communities that are happening, I feel like, call me optimistic, maybe this time we'll listen. I feel like it's time to listen. It wasn't listened to in the 80s and 90s. It looks like it's back, could be coming
Yes.
back.
And you guys, like, all of us are puzzle pieces, the overlap. When I have heard all these different testimonies over the years, you hear the same names come up, the same locations come up over and over and over and over again, the same experiences, the same rituals, the same dates, the same details. Like, there is so much crossover. The testimonies are the evidence, you guys. And so it's important that we do come together, and that you guys realize on the other side that your story is important, that it's not just about speaking out necessarily for your own healing. That's a huge part of it to do. But also realize that what you have is important. It's not just your trauma, it's also your purpose. It's something that you can give and help somebody else with who has either gone through it, or you can help prevent it. And if you provide your testimony and share, there's going to be people that come out and say, oh my gosh, me too. Or, wow, you just put
Oh
this,
yeah.
you gave me a puzzle piece. And so if we're sharing testimonies, that's what they don't want. They don't want survivors and advocates coming together and sharing this information, because then we will be able to put together the puzzle and the tapestry. And so it becomes a very lethal weapon to this system when we come together and paint the picture of everything and say, okay, well, we know that this location is involved, and we have 100 survivors that, can verify it from their experiences from all over the world. Like, that becomes proof all of a sudden, so like, understand how important that your testimony is. Your story is so important, and it's meant to change the world. It's meant to stop it from happening to another child.
Agreed. I've also received, I'm receiving probably 3 to 5 messages a week of people who say that they're also victims of SRA. Can you believe that?
I get the same thing. And I mean, I was kind of like you. I didn't think that this was common whenever I learned about it. I'm like, there's no way. Like, I'm gonna do a podcast, but it's probably gonna be difficult to find people.
Right?
And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so prevalent. Like, it's literally everywhere,
Yeah.
and I don't think people realize that. They might hear something and think, oh, well, it's just central to that one location. It can't be anywhere else. And like, no, you guys, it's in your neighborhoods, it's in your communities, it's in your towns.
Uh-huh.
It's literally everywhere, and we're not taught how to see it.
Agreed. And to piggyback on where the evidence actually is, haven't seen your podcast, like I said, or any episodes, but I encourage people who want to hear testimonies to listen to your podcast because I know it's there. It's what your podcast is known for.
Yes. And that's been, again, a really amazing side effect is that these testimonies have become puzzle pieces. They've become ways that we can learn about the world. They're a new news source. I always say it's like the new mainstream media. If we want to
Mhm.
know who's involved, we have to go to the people who are around the people involved and get the names from them. We have to get the locations from people who have been there. Testimonies are just so important. The more of us that come forward, the more testimony that we have that can corroborate on each other. My partner, he was in the Monarch program, and he speaks out a lot about very similar things that I do. He has his own podcast, and he has his own business called Organized Safety that's getting ready to sort of be deployed publicly, that he's been working on for the past decade, that essentially collects survivor information. You can send in tips anonymously, and it corroborates in a database where then you can compare and actually have testimony and evidence to turn into authorities to create a case for it. So that's another reason why this is important. Like all of these things become evidence when stacked together. Alone, they can call you Kibby, they can call you crazy if you're the only one in the world talking about this. But if there's a million other people that stand up and talk about it, are you crazy anymore? If people from all over the world all of a sudden are saying the same things as you? No. All of a sudden now a conspiracy theory turns into a fact. So it's the testimonies become the evidence that we can hopefully bring justice to this. That if we get loud enough and come together, and if more people stand up, of course, at the time that you're able to, I know not everybody's in a place where they can come forward, but if people are in a place to come forward, join us. Step up. You don't have to share everything, but put your puzzle piece out there and help us, join us, and know that we have your back. And that's really how I think that we can start bringing this thing down, is by like taking matters into our own hands. If we become the authority and we overrule the authority, then all of a sudden they have to listen to us. And that's the beautiful thing about the power that we have that they don't. They have convinced us that we're powerless, especially survivors, and nothing could be further than the truth. We're so powerful.
The survivor community is very powerful, in my opinion. Very smart, very kind-hearted, warm-hearted. I think it takes a very strong, courageous, open-minded, big-hearted person to face this.
It definitely does, but I always say to people, because I do get the occasional person who's like, oh, like I started one of your podcasts and I had to turn it off. It was just too much. And my response is always, if it's too hard for you to listen to, imagine what it was like living it. Like the
Right.
least that we can do is listen. Maybe not every testimony, maybe there's some stuff that might be triggering, but go find a survivor that's talking about it on a level that you can digest. There's all different levels of testimonies out there, from like a very PG rated to a rated R version. If you're not ready for the R version, find a PG version and start there. But the least that we can do is listen after what somebody like you went through, Kibby. Like that's not asking a lot. It's very, very, very simple, actually. And people that don't want to, like, I think they're cowards. I do. I think if you can look away from somebody who's literally pouring their soul out and just look away from it, you're a coward. Like you sinned, you turned your back on somebody who was very, very vulnerable and trusted you. And you're complicit. So again, I know not all this information might be palatable, and it might be really hard for some people to like dive in the deep end, but there's all different information out there now. There's no reason why we can't dip our toe in or dive all the way in. We should all be trying to actively learn one way or another and
Mhm.
listen. Like that's the very bare minimum that we can and should do.
Agreed. Agreed. I made it wasn't even a mistake. I was filling out my social media links and went to Google and put Kibbelinga Instagram. And then I saw some forums of people talking about me. I learned I'm never Googling my name again, but I was horrified. And it wasn't that not all people were being mean, right? Like, I think there's different types of people that don't believe this, people that are truly uninformed and want to, but are afraid to, but don't know how. And then I think that there's people that are too sick in their own denial, and it's like talking to a brick wall. Examples include people like my mom, or, someone who's very sick in their own denial.
And that's where the power of community comes in, because if we can be on the lookout for stuff like that, then we can go post in our communities and say, hey, go on this thread and go stand up for the survivor. Like, go in there and pepper the comment section with the fact that they're telling the truth. Like, we can have your back in that way. That's a really easy thing to do. And I'm really sorry that happened to you. It's so common that there's gaslighters out there doing everything that they can to, discredit you. And it's not always malicious, like you said. Some people just really aren't informed and like can't believe that something like that would happen, but it's very hurtful. And then people read something like that and might believe it, and so we have to be
That's
the
what
ones.
was happening.
We have to be the ones to go in and educate people if we see something like that and be like, no, have you ever heard of, satanic ritual abuse? Well, here's a book you can read, or here's a podcast episode, go check it out. Like, this is real. It's happening everywhere, and if we're all coming in and saying that, and there's 100 people saying it, like, again, now that one comment is one comment, and then there's 100 comments that negate it. So it's, it's basically
Mhm.
proving that one comment wrong. So it's like, that's the least that we can do. We need to come around and listen. And then we really need to stand up for people when, they're met with adversity. We need to go and be the survivors witness protection programs, that's like the biggest thing that people need to understand and like care about, is that this isn't in the past. It wasn't in the 70s when, in 50s and 60s when MK Ultra was like a thing with the CIA, and then it stopped. Like, it never stopped. It's just gotten worse, and because we keep looking away, like, they're laughing at us and saying we can do whatever we want. Nobody does anything about it. Let's just keep going, and so it's happening more and more and more. And as technology grows, and as the research grows, the tactics that they're using are getting worse and worse and worse for these kids. It's still happening today. So like, we do need to care. All children are all of our children. It's not just, oh, it's my neighbor's kid, or it's a kid that I don't know. Like, no, these are little beings that have no voice, and they have no advocates. They can't jump on social media and whistle blow. They can't do podcasts and like share their story. They don't even know what's happening to them, but we do. And so we have to be their voice. It's our innate responsibility. Like, it is our duty to do that. And we should do that with honor. We should be proud to serve our children. Like, they are the future of our planet. Like, it's not our world. We're borrowing it from our kids. Like, we have to take care of it while we're here and make sure that we're passing something good on to them, and not do what all of the generations before us did, which was nothing.
Right. It pains me to know that these children are in pain. Yeah. Is there any advice that you have for anyone who's experienced childhood trauma, whether it be, a slap, some physical abuse, sexual, anything, to the extremes of it?
That's a really good question. I could probably go on like forever about this. It's a really good question. But first of all, I would say, number one, when you remember what happened to you, if it was something that you're just contending with, whether you had it as a memory already and just kind of pushed it away a little bit and didn't deal with it, or if it was a repressed memory that comes up later on in life, it's going to affect you when you actually do look at it, or when it looks at you, and I would say the first thing is to realize, that whenever you're in those moments of remembering, that it's going to make you feel horrible to remember those things. You're going to go through a lot. That's part of the healing process. You're going to feel worse before you feel better, sadly, but in knowing that, also know that the only thing that changed in that moment, nothing changed. You're not in danger. I mean, I hope that you're not. But in a moment that you remember or contend with something, the only thing that changed is that now you have a recollection of something that you did not before. That's it. And it's emotional to remember that, but keep that in mind when you have this anger come up, or this rage, or just this sadness or fear or paranoia, because all of those are supernatural feelings and you will go through them. But help mitigate it by being your own cheerleader and saying, okay, the only thing that changed in this moment is that I remember something, and I'm contending with something that I didn't and haven't before. So I'm not in any additional danger. I'm not, there's nobody attacking me right now. I don't need to run. I need to sit here and process this, and do it in a very healthy way. And so that would be my first advice, is to like just be able to sit back with that thought as you're going through a hard time. And then also to make sure that, you're talking to safe people. It's really easy, I think, when you wake up to things to want to share with all your loved ones. And hopefully you have loved ones that you can share with, but as we said, sometimes this can be a lot for people and it can lead to disappointment. So take time to, if you're going to a church, ask your pastor if he's trauma informed, if they accept, abuse survivors, whether it's satanic ritual abuse, domestic, whatever it is, whatever your trauma is, make sure that where you're going is willing to open up their arms to you, because if they're not, it's going to be re-traumatizing. Make sure that you have a therapist that believes that satanic ritual abuse and DID is real, and that they have a history of working with clients, and that you can find testimonials, and find other survivors, find people that have gone through what you did, so you A, know that you're not alone, and B, have people that understand what you went through that you can heal with and or learn from if they're healed. I think that that's really important. This can be a very isolating experience, dealing with trauma and trying to heal from it, and it elicits a lot of emotions. And I think one of the biggest things is loneliness, and just that feeling of, not wanting to be here, not knowing where to go. And again, they're all very natural reactions, but if we sort of prepare ourselves in advance, or just have some tools in our toolbox, subscribe to some podcasts, whether it's Kibbi's, all of her amazing channels. You guys can learn so many tips from her. My podcast, there's others out there. Learn from people who have healed from what you went through. Make a whole list and try more than one thing. Try a bunch of things, try all the things that you can for healing. And one of the biggest things is writing, like write stuff down, because when we talk about stuff, we have emotions behind our words, and we express very differently than we do whenever we write. When you write, it's not emotional. You don't have to talk, and the part of your brain that you're using, it's very easy, and it's a lot easier to have things come out in a more clear and calm way, to where you can then go back and look at it. So that's a really big tip that I would give for people, is to journal. It's a less emotional way if you're not ready to talk about it. So yeah, making sure that your circle will support you, finding people that will support you, because that's important, making sure that people around you are trauma informed, and then of course, educating yourself, and, taking care of yourself in those very vulnerable moments that you have.
Nice, beautifully said. I think recovery is such a precious journey and so individualized, and that's the beauty of it. And I think those are great words of wisdom to get started. Thank
And know
you.
that we believe you and we love you. Just know that, like, you have people out here now who are advocating for you, that you have people fighting for you, and that you matter. That's really important for all of you to know.
Right. Survivors matter for sure. Well, thank you for coming on my podcast, Emma. I'll be guesting on Emma's podcast, actually. So that should be fun. I have no idea what questions she'll ask me, but it shall be interesting. So that's in the works. Where can we find you, Emma? I'll also link everything below, but where can we find you?
I try to be on every platform. I'm on some more than most, or more than others, I should say. But I would say my main platform is YouTube. That's where I do video. I do video premieres 2 to 3 days a week, and I have my biggest presence there, as far as where you can get content, and that's at the Imagination Podcast. You can just type that in, and like she said, it'll be in the show notes. I'm also on Rumble and BitChute for video with that same name, the Imagination Podcast. iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Buzzsprout, a lot of like kind of the smaller audio only podcasts. I would say iTunes and Spotify are probably the most popular, and the same, the Imagination Podcast. I also have a Substack that I do under my name, Emma Katherine, and that's at www.emmakatherine.substack.com. I'm writing is another one of my passions, so I try to share that as like a personal project, and I do the same topic. I'll talk about stuff that's not on the podcast. I'll talk about things that I've learned. I'll talk about lessons that I've learned from survivors. I'll feature survivors, people who don't want to or aren't ready yet to do a podcast. I've done disclosures on Substack for people who'd rather submit a written testimony where they can be more anonymous. So I try to have a presence on there also. And then Twitter is probably where I'm at the most on social media. And my name there is at the Emmapreneur. It's like entrepreneur, but Emmapreneur. I'm on Instagram at Your Imagination is Real, and under my name Emma Katherine or Emma Katherine Official. I forget what it is. I don't use that account too terribly much, but I am on there. And I'm on Facebook. I'm pretty much everywhere, but I would say like YouTube and Twitter are probably where I'm most active.
Okay, I'll
And
make sure to include all of those links. And I thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on here again and talking. I do just appreciate my audience so much, and Emma's too. Believing it, I think, is helping us spread awareness. So thank you, Emma, for all you do for the community. We need you. We need you and others like you. And again, I thank you so much for coming on here. Is there anything else you would like to add?
I want to thank you too, Kibbi. You're so brave. Your audience is brave. Anybody that will look at this, is very brave, and I ask you guys to please go lift Kibbi up, go share all of her content, just do whatever you can to stand by her, and helping. So just keep doing what you guys are doing and keep believing, keep supporting. And thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor to come on your podcast. And I congratulate you for starting one and putting yourself out there. It's a big step, and I hope that it encourages other people to do the same.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you. Well, guys, that concludes episode 5 of She Got Away. I'm your host, Kibbi Linga, and today our guest is the amazing Emma Katherine, an SRA and child abuse advocate. I thank you so much, Emma, for being here and for my audience being here and listening. And again, your audience too, anyone in this community. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of She Got Away, your podcast that shines light on the depths of darkness. I'm your host, Kibbi Linga. And again, this is Emma Katherine. Thank you, Emma. When I was a child, guys, I dreamt of becoming an artist and sharing my story. Until next time, bye, and bye, Emma.